The Alpha's Healer, a Destined Mate Story. The moonlight filtered through the dense canopy of the ancient forest, casting an ethereal glow over the thick foliage. Galena's heart pounded in excitement as she let Allah stretch her legs after months of forced dormancy. The moment her paws hit the forest floor, a wave of exhilaration crashed over her. The wind rushed through her fur, whispering secrets of the wild, carrying with it the sense of pine, earth, and distant waters. She reveled in the feeling of pure, unrestrained movement, a stark contrast to the rigid discipline of human life. For too long she had been confined to the trappings of her studies, suppressing her true nature in lecture halls filled with sterile air and books instead of the life-giving sense of the earth. Now she was free from expectations, from whispered doubts, from the ever-watchful eyes of her past. Each stride was a declaration of her independence, a reminder that she was more than just a healer, more than the girl her pack had tried to shape. Here, in the depths of the wilderness, she was simply Galena, wild, untamed, and whole. The cool night air filled her lungs, invigorating her as she leaped over fallen logs and raced between trees. Ayala howled within her, a song of joy and defiance, a celebration of the untamed spirit they shared. And for the first time in a long time, Galena allowed herself to truly feel it, to be at peace with who she was. She had stayed away from her pack's territory, careful to avoid any familiar sense. The last thing she wanted was to be dragged back before she could complete her studies. The Alpha had been good to her, treating her like a daughter after the loss of her parents in the war, but his son, Caden, had been nothing short of a nightmare. He had tormented her for years, jealousy and cruelty rolling off him in waves as he tried to break her spirit. But he had failed. Galena had endured, thrived even. She had honed her skills as both a warrior and a healer, though the latter was her true calling. But it wasn't just her skill in healing that set her apart. It was everything about her. She was stronger than most of the warriors in her pack, faster than Caden himself, and far more intelligent. While others struggled to grasp advanced battle techniques, she mastered them in days. Her mind was sharp, her instincts impeccable, and her presence undeniable. And that had been Caden's greatest torment. She had outshone him in every way. He was supposed to be the heir, the next Alpha, the strongest. Yet Galena had bested him in combat before she had even come of age. She had excelled in strategy, effortlessly weaving plans in battle that even the elders marveled at. And on top of it all, she was beautiful, radiating a confidence and grace that made her stand out even more. Caden's jealousy had grown into cruelty, his torment fueled by his inadequacy. He had tried to undermine her at every turn, belittling her, mocking her, doing anything he could to make her doubt herself. "You're just a girl, Galena. A pretty face won't make you strong," he had sneered after she bested him in a sparring match, his pride wounded. Another time, he had cornered her outside the training grounds, his voice dripping with venom. "No matter how hard you try, you'll never be more than an orphan we took pity on. The pack will never follow you over me." But he had failed. She had never let his venom seep into her soul. She had risen above it, walking away from his games, choosing her own path. And that was what had infuriated him the most. She never reacted the way he wanted, never crumbled under his words. Instead, she thrived, excelling beyond what he could ever hope to achieve. Yet, in the human world, she had to suppress her instincts, her wolf, to blend in. It had been difficult. But now, with her studies nearly complete, she felt the pull of the wild calling her back, the yearning to be herself, to let Allah free, to embrace the power and purpose she had always carried within her. A rustle in the distance made her pause mid-stride. A scent drifted toward her, sharp, metallic, mixed with something raw and powerful. Blood. Her wolf senses sharpened, and she lowered herself into a crouch, creeping forward silently, Allah's instincts heightening her alertness. Then she heard the growl. Allah froze. Galena's body tensed, her ears picking up the pained sound of an injured wolf. She hesitated, a wave of unease washing over her. Approaching meant risking everything, her secrecy, her independence, her fragile sense of safety. She didn't want to get involved, didn't want to be drawn into another pack's problems. But Allah wouldn't let her turn away. "We have to help him," Allah urged, her voice firm within their bond. "You know we can't ignore this." Galena clenched her jaw, her mind warring against her instincts. "It's not our problem," she argued, but even as she thought it, she knew she was lying to herself. She had always been a healer first, and no matter how much she wanted to stay detached, she couldn't abandon someone in need. Taking a deep breath, she moved closer, pressing herself against a tree, peering through the underbrush, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. There, in a small clearing, a massive wolf lay trapped in a cruel iron bear trap, its fangs bared in a desperate snarl. His deep, midnight black fur was matted with blood, his powerful muscles taut with strain. Despite his predicament, he exuded dominance, an alpha. Allah gasped within their bond. "Mate." The single word reverberated through her being like a thunderclap. Galena sucked in a sharp breath, her pulse hammering against her ribs. Number, this couldn't be happening. Not now. Not when she had built a life of her own. She forced herself to breathe, to suppress the way her body ached to move toward him, to touch him. She had spent years convincing herself she didn't need anyone, especially not a mate. Yet, here she was, battling the pull of destiny as if it were something she could ever hope to resist. She didn't need a mate, didn't want one. But there he was, helpless yet still commanding, radiating an aura of raw power that had her wolf practically howling with the need to go to him. "We have to help him," Allah insisted. "He's hurt." Galena clenched her fists. It was true. She couldn't walk away, not when he was in pain. She took a steadying breath and stepped forward. "Easy," she murmured, her voice calm but firm. "I'm here to help." The wolf snarled but lacked the strength to truly threaten her. His sapphire eyes, as blue and deep as the ocean, locked onto hers, recognition flickering within them. Even in his pain, he knew what she was to him. Mine," he growled, his voice thick with agony. Galena swallowed hard. Ignoring the overwhelming emotions surging through her, she knelt beside him, assessing the trap. The metal teeth had dug deep into his hind leg, preventing him from shifting. Wounds like this were dangerous for werewolves. Their rapid healing didn't work properly when silver was involved. She could see the pain in his sapphire eyes, the tension in his body as he fought to remain still. He couldn't shift, not without losing his leg completely. Galena bit her lip, knowing she wouldn't be able to open the trap in her human form. She hesitated only for a moment before taking a deep breath and surrendering to the shift. Ayala surged forward, the transformation swift and seamless. Her reddish-brown fur shimmered in the moonlight as she steadied herself. Allah moved closer, her powerful wolf form allowing her to grip the metal trap with her jaws. With a deep growl and a flex of her muscles, she pulled, the metal groaning under the force of her strength. The second the pressure was gone, the alpha let out a deep groan and collapsed against the ground, his breathing heavy. Galena shifted back into her human form, her hands shaking slightly from the exertion. Wasting no time, she reached into her small satchel, pulling out a handful of herbs she had collected earlier and a shirt to cover up. She crushed a few leaves between her fingers, the potent scent filling the air, before pressing them gently against the wound. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, knowing exactly which herbs would ease his pain and stave off infection. "I need you to shift," she urged softly. "I can treat you better that way." His eyes fluttered open, burning into hers with an intensity that made her stomach twist. With a low growl, his body convulsed, shifting and twisting until a man lay in the wolf's place. A very naked, very powerful man Galena's breath caught in her throat. His long dark hair was matted with sweat, his chiseled features sharp, even through the pain. He was beautiful in a dangerous way, like a storm just before it unleashed its wrath. "Who are you?" he rasped, wincing as he tried to sit up. "Galena," she answered simply, focusing on her work rather than the way his muscles flexed under his skin. "And you are?" "Killian," he replied, his voice filled with authority. "Alpha of the Shadowfang pack." Her heart stopped. Shadowfang. One of the strongest packs, locked in a vicious war with her former home. Fate was truly cruel. She pushed the revelation aside and continued treating his wound. "You were lucky," she murmured. "Another few hours, and you might have lost the leg." His lips curved into a smirk despite the pain. "I'd say I'm lucky in more ways than one." Galena stiffened at the meaning behind his words. "Don't get any ideas," she warned. "I'm not interested in being anyone's mate." Killian's gaze darkened, amusement flickering in his eyes. "That's not how this works, sweetheart." She rolled her eyes but didn't dignify that with a response. Instead, she focused on wrapping his leg. "You need to rest," she said firmly. "Shifting too soon will only reopen the wound." Killian watched her with a mix of curiosity and admiration. "You're a healer?" She nodded. "Among other things." A shadow crossed his face. "And yet, you don't smell like a pack wolf." Her hands stilled for a fraction of a second before she resumed her work. "I left." Killian studied her in silence before murmuring, "You must have had a good reason." She met his gaze, surprised by the lack of judgment in his tone. "I did." Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding forged in pain and survival. Killian sighed, closing his eyes. "Well, Galena, you saved my life. That means I owe you." She snorted. "You don't owe me anything, just don't get yourself caught in any more traps." He chuckled, a deep, rich sound that sent warmth through her. "I'll try." Galena stood, brushing off her hands. "I should go before someone comes looking for you." Killian's eyes snapped open. "You're just going to leave?" "Yes." She hesitated for only a moment before adding, "Heal well, Alpha." As she turned to go, she felt his gaze burning into her back, an unspoken plea echoing through the bond neither of them could ignore. Killian let out a low growl, his voice rough with pain and determination. "You can't just leave, Galena. You're mine." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps reached her ears. A group of wolves emerged from the trees, Killian's beta and his warriors, their gazes shifting from their wounded Alpha to her. The moment was tense, their loyalty evident as they surrounded him protectively. "Alpha, we need to get you back!" The beta growled, his voice sharp with authority. His eyes flickered to Galena, narrowing with suspicion as he took in her presence beside his wounded leader. "Who is she? Why is an outsider this close to you?" Before Galena could even react, a deep, bone-chilling growl rumbled through the air, sending a clear warning. Killian's eyes darkened dangerously as his lips curled back in a snarl. "She saved me, and she is my mate," he thundered, his voice laced with fury. "You will treat her with respect." The bait immediately bowed his head in submission, though his wariness lingered in his gaze. "Understood, Alpha." Galena's breath hitched. She wanted to refuse, wanted to turn and run, but Killian's eyes locked onto hers, filled with something deeper than just command. "You saved me, Galena," he murmured. "And I'm not letting my mate just walk away like that, and we cannot stay here." She exhaled slowly, her mind racing with all the reasons she should refuse. But Allah stirred within her, sensing the undeniable pull of the bond. "Fine," she said, her voice firm but reluctant. "But only if you promise to get me back home safely once you've recovered." Killian's eyes softened slightly, a glint of something unreadable flickering in their depths. I swear it, on my honor as an alpha. As they neared the Shadowfang Pack's stronghold, a tense energy crackled in the air. The pack had gathered, their eyes filled with worry and anticipation. Killian was known for his brutal efficiency in battle, his fierce leadership, but he was also deeply respected for his fairness and unwavering loyalty to his people. The warriors stood tall, their gazes scanning their alpha's injuries with barely concealed concern, while the elders murmured among themselves. Galena wasted no time assisting the pack healers. Though they were skilled, they hesitated when faced with the brutal wound on Killian's leg. Without a second thought, she knelt beside him, her hands steady as she guided them through the delicate process of setting the fractured bone and binding it properly. Wolves healed fast, alpha wolves even faster, but the wound needed precise care to ensure he could recover his full strength. The healers watched in awe as Galena worked, her knowledge surpassing their own. They whispered among themselves, astonished by her expertise. She's powerful for a beta, her skills. They're unlike anything I've seen. Despite her reluctance, Galena couldn't deny the satisfaction that came with healing others. Even here, among unfamiliar wolves, her purpose was the same: to mend what was broken, to bring strength where there was weakness. And as Killian's golden eyes locked onto hers, filled with something more than gratitude, she wondered if fate had led her here for more than just a fleeting moment. The healers worked swiftly, preparing a potent herbal concoction known to accelerate a wolf's natural healing. One of the elders carefully handed the steaming mixture to Killian, urging him to drink. The alpha took it without hesitation, grimacing slightly at the bitter taste but knowing it would help restore his strength. His warriors stood close, watching with unwavering loyalty, reassured by the swift actions of their skilled healers and Galena's presence. After ensuring that Killian was as comfortable as possible, his beta turned to Galena. "You should rest and freshen up," he said, his tone respectful but firm. "We have prepared a space for you. The maids are waiting to assist you." Galena arched a brow at that, amused by the notion of being waited on like a princess. "That won't be necessary," she replied, shaking her head. "I can manage on my own." The beta hesitated, then inclined his head. "As you wish. Fresh clothes have been set aside for you. Take your time." She retreated to the quarters they had provided, dismissing the waiting maids with a polite but firm gesture. A bath drawn with fragrant herbs awaited her, but she opted for a quick hot shower instead, letting the water wash away the tension and grime from the long night. Once clean, she slipped into the fresh clothing they had given her, simple yet elegant, clearly chosen with some thought. Feeling refreshed, she made her way back to Killian's chamber only to find it empty. Her heart clenched with unease as her gaze darted around the dimly lit room. The alpha was gone. Frowning, she inhaled deeply, letting her wolf take control for a moment. His scent was strong, leading her down the hallways of the pack house. She followed it to a large wooden door, slightly ajar, where hushed voices filtered through. Pushing it open, she stepped inside to find Killian seated in his study, his beta standing beside him with an expression of disbelief. "You should be resting," Galena scolded, crossing her arms. "Not playing the all-powerful alpha while you're barely healed?" Killian smirked, leaning back in his chair. "I appreciate the concern, little wolf, but I feel fine, and I had work to do." The beta scoffed. "I told him the same thing, but he wouldn't listen. You try knocking some sense into him." Galena sighed, shaking her head. "Unbelievable. I go to freshen up for a little while, and you sneak off like a misbehaving pup." Killian chuckled, his deep voice rich with amusement. "I'd rather be a misbehaving pup than a bedridden one. Besides, I worked up an appetite. Care to join me for dinner?" She narrowed her eyes at him but relented. "At least, you still have an appetite after everything." "Fine. But if you collapse halfway through, don't expect me to carry you back." Killian's grin widened. Noted, little wolf. Now, let's eat. Dinner was set in a private dining room, the warm glow of candlelight casting a golden hue over the richly decorated space. The tension from their earlier argument still hung in the air, but as the meal began, Galena found herself slowly relaxing. The food was delicious, and despite her initial irritation, she was relieved to see Killian eating heartily. Halfway through the meal, their discussion turned serious. "I will return to my studies," Galena stated firmly, setting down her fork. "I won't abandon my path just because of fate." Killian's jaw tensed. "And I won't leave you unprotected. You're my mate, Galena. I will ensure your safety, but not by caging you. I just need to know you're safe, even if from a distance." She exhaled sharply, ready to argue, but his gaze softened. "I'll make you a deal. Finish your studies. But I'll have my warriors watching over you in secret. And," he added, cutting off her protest, "you'll visit every week. Give us a chance to get to know each other before you decide anything." Galena frowned, but deep down, she knew there was no truly denying the mate bond. It was a force beyond reason, beyond choice. And despite herself, she was drawn to him in ways she could not describe. "Fine," she relented, "but no hovering." Killian smirked. "No promises." Galena returned to her studies, slipping back into the rhythm of her academic life. But she was never truly alone. Killian, unable to bear the thought of her being too far from his reach, ensured her safety in ways she could barely protest. His warriors lingered in the shadows, watching over her without making their presence known. But it wasn't just protection he provided. He found ways to remind her of his presence every day. Every morning, a bouquet of wildflowers arrived at her door, their scents carrying the essence of the forests she longed for. Short, thoughtful messages would appear on her phone. Simple, but telling. "Have you eaten? Do you even sleep? And always a good morning, little wolf." Despite her efforts to resist the bond, Galena couldn't ignore the warmth that filled her every time she saw his name. It was foolish to deny the pull between them, the way her heart fluttered at the mere thought of him. His messages, though brief, were a lifeline, small threads of connection that kept him ever present in her mind. Destiny had tied them together, an unbreakable tether woven into her very soul. And though she still clung to her independence, she found herself craving the moments when his golden eyes settled on hers with that knowing intensity. Each meeting chipped away at her resolve, each lingering glance made her wonder, why was she still fighting something that felt so inevitable, so right? She told herself she was only indulging in curiosity, that she needed time to decide what she truly wanted. But deep down, a secret part of her whispered that she already knew the answer. She was his and he was hers, whether she was ready to admit it or not. When the weekend arrived, Galena found herself excited heading back to Killian's territory, though this time, something was different. She wasn't just fulfilling a promise. She was curious, eager even. There was a new fire within her, an undeniable pull toward him, and she wasn't going to fight it anymore. As she stepped onto his land, she carried herself with an air of quiet confidence, her gaze locking onto his the moment she saw him. Killian noticed the shift immediately. His golden eyes darkened with awareness as he watched her approach, his lips curling into a smirk. "You look like you're about to eat me alive, little wolf," he murmured, but his voice had shifted, less teasing, more raw, more hungry. He watched her like a predator, waiting for the moment to strike, his eyes tracking every breath she took, every subtle movement she made. He murmured, his voice teasing but laced with something deeper, something more primal. Galena swallowed hard, her breath hitching at the sheer intensity of his gaze. The heat pooling in her stomach spread like wildfire, and she barely resisted the urge to bite her lip. She wasn't used to feeling this unrestrained, this bold, but something about him, about them, ignited a need she couldn't ignore. "Maybe I am," she replied huskily, her voice lower than she intended, betraying the desire simmering beneath her skin. Killian's smirk faltered for just a second, his expression shifting from amusement to something far more dangerous, far more tempting. His nostrils flared as he took in her scent, his wolf reacting to the shift in her aura. "Careful, Galena," he murmured, his voice thick with restrained hunger. "You might just get what you're asking for. And if you keep looking at me like that, I won't be able to stop myself." Dinner was intimate, the candlelight casting a golden hue over the table between them, but Galena could barely focus on the food. She found herself stealing glances at him, at the way his strong hands gripped the silverware, the way his shirt stretched across his broad chest. She could sense the way his wolf prowled beneath the surface, restless and waiting, just like hers. After dinner, they moved to the fireplace, the flickering flames painting warm shadows across the room. Galena leaned back in her chair, her lips quirking up mischievously. "For someone who insists on rest, you certainly seem full of energy. Maybe I should find a way to tire you out." Killian's smirk widened, but his eyes burned with intent. "Careful, Galena. You keep teasing, and I might just take you up on that offer." She held his gaze, daring him. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't look away. And then, as if some unseen force finally snapped between them, Killian closed the space between them, capturing her lips in a long-awaited searing kiss. Heat exploded through her, her hands gripping his shoulders as he pulled her against him, claiming her in a way that left no doubt. She was his, and she didn't want to fight it anymore. A soft, breathy moan escaped her as she melted into him, her fingers tangling in his hair. The hunger between them was palpable, raw, and unrelenting. Killian growled low in his throat, his hands roaming down her back, pressing her flush against him. When he finally broke the kiss, his breath was heavy, his golden eyes dark with need. Galena swallowed hard, her chest rising and falling with unsteady breaths. She had never felt this kind of heat before, never this kind of urgency. "Killian," she whispered, her voice husky with longing. "Claim me." The word sent a visible shudder through him, his body going rigid as his grip on her tightened. His wolf surged forward, barely restrained, his eyes flickering between man and beast. "You know what you're asking for, little wolf," he rasped, his voice thick with desire and something deeper, something primal. She held his gaze, unwavering. "I do." A slow, predatory smile curled his lips as he brushed a knuckle along her jaw. "Then you're mine. Now and for always."